Hi, John Lay here from Talented Learning, here to bring you another update. Today's update is how to define your LMS requirements in 2021. A pretty important topic, as we'll talk about here in just a second. Our agenda for today is about a 20-minute presentation. We are going to talk about the learning objectives, so what we're going to learn today and what's in it for you. We're going to introduce the 2021 Learning Management System Marketplace and the different types of LMSs and how LMSs differentiate with each other and how that translates into the 6 types of LMS requirements every organization needs to define if they're going to replace their LMS or purchase another LMS. And so why should you listen to this presentation? 20 minutes, that's a long time to invest because there's 1,000 different learning management, learning technology, learning solutions in the marketplace. 1,000. At Talented Learning, I've spent 7 complete years. I'm now in my 8th year of trying to make my way through those 1,000, and I've only talked to and only evaluated and followed now about 250 of them. So dedicating the whole career towards it, it still takes many years to get to that 1,000. So it's really easy to make a wrong choice. How many do you evaluate out of that 1,000? All of them? 10, 20? How many is too much? But if you make the wrong choice for your organization and you buy the wrong learning management system, well, that could have huge personal and political consequences, cost and time implications for your organization, lack of productivity. There's no easy way to hide with a bad learning management system purchase. So it's really important to get it right the first time, and that's how organizations get it wrong, is by not defining their learning management system requirements up front and taking that time the way that they do. How do I know this? How do I know that defining your requirements minimizes risk and maximizes success? Because I'm a recovering LMS sales guy. That's why I spent 14 years carrying a quota and carrying a bag for 2 different enterprise LMS companies. And I watched a lot of organizations buy learning technology. I watched a lot of them do it great. I watched way more do it horribly. And over those 14 years, I became a student of really what works and what doesn't, and what the best organizations were doing to prepare before they met me as an LMS sales guy. And that's what I'm going to teach you today. And that's what we do for our consulting practice here at Talented Learning, is we help organizations buy learning technology by guiding them through the exact process I'm going to teach you here today. Why would I give away my secrets? Because you can do this without me if you have a chance. There's only so much that we can help, and every organization needs a learning management system because there's so many different types. In fact, there's hundreds and hundreds and maybe even 1,000 different learning systems in the marketplace. A day doesn't go by when somebody doesn't reach out to me and say, hey, we got a new learning system and there's a new logo on the sheet. So there's lots of different learning systems originating from every corner of the world. And our job at Talented Learning was to try to figure out what they all do and make sense of it so that we can help people like you to figure out who they should be talking to after you define your requirements and you're ready to engage the vendor population. But it's interesting to note that after doing all these reviews of learning management systems and then pretending I'm Charles Darwin by grouping like with like and working on my taxonomy and my nomenclature of the different market, what I came to the conclusion is that organizations, LMS vendor organizations, differentiate from each other through these 6 different lenses: use case support, functional capabilities, technical capabilities, the ability to deliver professional services and what those services are, how they support the customer, and really their overall business experience and how they charge for the use of their solution. There's no set standard way. There's no rules in the industry on how you have to do each of these pieces. It's all up to the individual vendor to determine what their mix of these are. And so, as it turns out, by looking at those 6 different lenses and the capabilities of all these different systems, I determined that there's really 7 different types of learning management systems that exist in the marketplace. Those for corporate, those for academia, And in the corporate side, those that are geared towards employees, those are geared towards your customers, your partners, your gig workers, or any combination of that, are all different sectors in the marketplace. And there's also a new evolving sector of service provider LMSs that uses somebody else's LMS, like a open source LMS or maybe one of the cloud-based LMSs, and wraps a whole bunch of success services around that software as their competitive differentiation. So in each one of these different 7 spheres, or 7 segments in our circle rather, is a different set of competitors. And those competitors all differentiate in one of these spheres or segments based on those 6 different things that we talked about, from functionality, professional services, and so forth. So it's when you start categorizing like with like, then you can see patterns in all these different vendors. Why is that important? Well, if you know exactly what you need, then you can look in the right segment at the right vendors that specialize in what you're trying to do, and you can find qualified vendors much faster than trying to do what I've done for the last 7 years and go vendor by vendor and qualify them yourself. So as it turns out, LMS requirements match up directly with vendor differentiation if you do it correctly. If you focus on defining your intended use, your functional, your technical, your professional service, your support, and your business requirements, well, lo and behold, that lines up to the exact differentiation in the same categories that vendors are using to differentiate themselves. And so you develop the Rosetta Stone, or the common language. And developing that common language allows you to communicate to the vendor community your differentiation in your project and how it's different from all the other projects that are out there in learning management system. And it allows the vendor to process that information, and if it aligns with their wheelhouse and their specialty, to come back with super specialized solutions and obvious proof of that specialty that they have in providing those solutions. And there's a match made in heaven, and that makes us happy here at Talented Learning and what we focus on. So let's talk about intended use cases. Who's the intended use case? It's all based on audience. So here are the 6 different ones we'll go through. The 6 different types of requirements that all successful buyers of learning technology take the time to develop. So who is it for? Who are our audiences? Sometimes it's simple. It's just your employees. But sometimes it's multiple audiences, different types of employees, or franchises, or franchisees, or international employees, or customers, or prospective customers, or partners, or suppliers, or sales partners, or service partners, or gig workers, or who are they? Start there on who are all the different audiences that you support, and why do you support them, and how do you support them right now? That's your intended use case, and that's the most fundamental way to line up with the market and how the solutions are organized in the marketplace, is to find ones that specialize in your use case. If your use cases are more the more specialized ones, like for professional associations or members or member organizations, then you'll find less organizations that specialize in that. If your use case is more generic, like employee training and compliance, then you'll find more, as it turns out. But it's important to start there, because your use cases feed into your functional requirements. What are your functional requirements? Well, functional requirements are, exactly that, what you need the learning management system to do, but it's based on your use case. So, for example, if you have an employee LMS, your requirements are going to be heavy on organizational management, role-based management, the ability to assign mandatory content and have managers or administrators manage the compliance aspects of that. Who has met that compliance, who hasn't, who is expiring, all those type of functionalities. That would be very standard type things in an employee. But if your LMS was focused at a different use case, at training your customer audiences, your external audiences, then you are focused more on things like user experience, the design through the content, adaptive learning, personalization of the learning experience to the learner and the products that you purchased. For example, those are a different set of requirements. Neither set, the compliance isn't applicable over here, and that personalization and those things generally aren't applicable on the other side, or not to the same degree. So if you start with your use cases and then derive what you want those learners to do, from how they find your system to what they do when they enter into your system, how are you going to do that to minimize the clicks that you really want them to get to what you want them to do, that allows you to change that behavior in a measurable way. So if their job is just getting to take one piece of content, what is the steps that is involved to do that? And when you write that out and write that learner journey out and that flow, what ends up coming out of there are the requirements that you need that are from a functional standpoint of what you need your LMS to do. And so instead of downloading a spreadsheet that might have 1,500 requirements on there and you mark them all off as critical, we've all done that. I only have 996 critical, but 4 optional requirements. Well, what that allows you to do is always buy the most comprehensive system, but not what you really need. If you work backwards from your use cases, then it turns out that you really only have about 100 or maybe 150 requirements instead of 1,000 or 1,500, and those are the ones that you really need to focus on. And so what are some examples in LMSs or learning systems? Well, it could be functionality that's geared towards the learner, like the interface and gamification and mobile responsiveness or a mobile app, digital badges, or maybe skills acquisition or management. Or it could be functionality that's geared towards the instructor, from like managing rosters or creating classes or instances of classes, or preparing the course content or the class content, or assignments, or OJT, checklists, or demonstrable proof of being able to do activities out in the field. And it might be really focused on administrative things that you need to manage compliance, or continuing education credits in your hospital, or reporting and analytics of certain types, or your unique ways on how you group organizations and users and manage compliance throughout your organization, or the languages or the areas in the world in which you compete in. So you need globalization and localization capabilities to create, deliver, and sell content in different parts of the world. These are just examples of functional requirements. At Talented Learning, we've created about 30 different buckets of requirements, and those buckets of requirements to some degree are needed in a lot of LMS implementations, but to different degrees, as we talked about before. Sometimes one bucket is real important in customer and another bucket is real important in employees. But if you start there, work backwards through your use cases to those buckets of functionality, then you know exactly what you want. And what you want to try to do is find an LMS that does what you want, but not a ton more, and certainly not any less. And then you can grow with that LMS over time. And that allows you to buy something that's not so expensive at first, but it'll help you get to where you're trying to go. And that's a trick. But then you have your technical requirements. So you just can't stop there on the clicks and the features. Sure, I might have badges or I might have gamification, but technical requirements are where an LMS typically fails. And so I've seen a lot of LMS selection processes, not my own that I'm running, because I help my clients avoid these pitfalls, but to go all the way down the process of finding a system and getting all the way, and then realizing technically it doesn't fit what the organization's standards are or IT standards are. And so that could be things from like the deployment model of, we have to have it on premise, or it has to be in the cloud, or it has to be automatic updates, or we have to have control of our updates, or we want a third party to host it. And then it also has to deal with the technical integrations, like how am I going to plug this into my ecosystem? What's the API? What's the language in the calls? How available is that documentation? How easy is it to push data in and out of the application? How comprehensive is that that API? How many things can I do with it? Based on my use cases, can I do those type of things? How do I transfer data? Is it just one way, or can I do it both ways? And more importantly, or just as importantly, is there connectors or pre-built integrations that I can leverage so I don't have to build everything custom? Like for, if I'm integrating my CRM as HubSpot, do you already have a HubSpot connector so I can just enter in a code and the two are connected? My two accounts are connected? Do you have something like that? How about for Salesforce? Or how about for my Tableau reporting and analytics, or my e-commerce shopping storefront, or my HR system or finance system, or different social media or collaboration or workforce automation tools, or even virtual meeting, GoToMeeting, Zoom, or WordPress, or other CMS or websites. These are all different parts of an ecosystem, of a learning ecosystem that exists. And so the ability to transfer data back and forth to them is critical. So from a requirement standpoint, it's critical to identify what that ecosystem is, what those systems are, and how you want that data to flow back and forth to the LMS and why. And by defining all that, you'll be able to, one, paint an accurate picture for vendors for what would be a custom API integration, but two, from a pricing standpoint down the road, to ensure that you cover and check off the boxes for how you're going to basically tie that system into your ecosystem. Because without tying that seamlessly, then you have disjointed user experiences or manual interventions, or in between your different systems, or generally a lack of cohesion, and all that has time and customer satisfaction or learner satisfaction costs associated with it. So defining that technical is key. The last parts of the technical are the security parts. What I like to do is go to IT and say, okay, outside of LMSs, how do you buy, as a consultant I say this, how do you buy software? What are the rules and regulations that you have? Do you have standard checklists or information that you need to require, or minimum thresholds? Some organizations have none, and then we use, our judgment on, what would be a standard set that they should adhere to based on industry standards. But many organizations already have this fleshed out, and it's better to work with your IT, get those requirements, limitations up front, define those on what your security levels are going to be, what certification your hosted environment needs to have, how are you going to do your production and your sandbox and your testing environments, and how does that integration and promotion work to those, and how do you do backups and disaster recovery and third-party penetration tests, and what are your standards in terms of GDPR or accessibility with WCAG or 508C type capabilities, or the infrastructure of SAS 70. These are all things that IT departments worry about and have certain standards on, and so you want to define those standards and put those into your requirements up front, because the worst scenario, and I've seen this happen, is to go through the whole process, come down to your favorite LMS that your whole big cross-functional group wants to buy, and then have IT say, but they don't meet our standards. We can't use these guys. And I've been on the vendor side of that, of unfortunately going all the way down the road and then being disqualified at the 11th hour for technical. And I've seen it happen from a consulting side to organizations that get stuck in that trap. So defining those technical requirements, just like your other requirements up front, is key. So now we come to the big differentiator, and we remember that circle of the different types of LMSs and what they support. Well, inside of each one of those segments, the vendors provide different levels of professional services and different types of professional services. So, for example, many LMS providers provide an implementation. However, some make the assumption that it's so easy that you could just implement yourself and turn it on and configure it. So some LMS providers provide no implementation, just support and maybe knowledge bases and things like that. Some provide kind of like a reactive support person that you can ask questions to as you're configuring it up by yourself. And some have full project teams of project managers, technical people, data experts, solution engineers, executives that all work together with your project team to guide you through the implementation, integration, migration, and rollout process. And so depending on your scenario from a learning management system and your use cases and your functional requirements, and whether this is your first LMS or your fifth LMS, and whether you have 100 users or 200,000 users, all those things are different layers of complexity and ugliness in a given requirement set. And so based on all of those, organizations need a certain amount of help from the vendor to help them be successful, because they don't have all the resources. You're only buying a system once every 3, 5, 10 years. So it's not like you keep the resources on full time just for that. So you need vendors to help you out with the complementary resources that you need. but it can go beyond the implementation resources. It can also go beyond, be things like content development, marketing services, marketing communication, video, mobile app development, data migrations and customizations and validation type services, administrative or end user training. All of those are different aspects of professional services that you may need as a buyer and that vendors may or may not provide. Well, nothing inhibits success of when you need vendor support and they don't have the resources from a people standpoint to support that. So lots of LMS and learning system solutions fail because of that at that point. So defining what you need from help makes it easy. And the second part of help is what you need from a support. And think of support in two pieces. The administrative support, so what's your core team that's running the LMS? What do they need? How do they interact with the vendor? On a Monday through Friday, or is it, 24 hours a day, around the clock, around the year that you need that active help from an administrative side to help. And then there's also the end learner side. So who provides the support to the actual learners of the software? A lot of time that's the buying organization's own help desk, IT help desk that could do that. But sometimes those resources aren't available. So you need the vendor to provide those particular services to the end learner, whether that's through chat or bots or sometimes even picking up the phone or email to be able to support those learners. So define very specifically how and what support you expect, what hours you expect it in, what languages you expect that support in. So it doesn't do you any good to provide English support to a company in Germany and vice versa. So making sure that the support personnel line up with where your learners or administrators are going to be, as well as what you would expect from incremental things like user groups or regional user groups or community centers or knowledge bases or things like videos or training or certification to learn how to use the LMS, even managed administration so that somebody else can do the personnel administration of your LMS. All those things are support requirements that defining up front is a great way to disqualify vendors that don't meet that, or at the very least identify that vendors aren't meeting your support requirements up front and factor that into your decision of whether you would want to live with that particular limitation. But if you don't define it, a lot of times you don't figure out exactly what's going on until it's too late. And then the last lens is the business requirements. What do you need this vendor to do? And a couple pieces of that. One is just the vendor experience. And so when we talked about that circle of the 7 types of learning management system, well, the vendor experience really comes into play on those different specialist types. How long have they been in business? What type of where do the executives come from? What is the history of their organization? Where do they grow? What problems have they been solving? Where are they located geographically? What industry do they have the most experience in? What use case do they live in? Is that use case the same as yours? Is it a big company or a small boutique company? Where are the services provided in the world? Who are you going to be interacting with? All those things are vendor experience. And in my experience, buyers care a whole lot about this because when you buy a learning system, you want to see referenceable clients that are doing the same things that you're trying to do. And you want to see a lot of them because what you want to hope for is that there's a lot of similar type clients that this vendor has, similar to you, so that when they're investing dollars into research and development, there's a good chance that effort is going to wash down on you as something useful. If you have one of these big companies, these big talent management providers, for every dollar they invest in research and development, probably only 5% of it washes down to you because they've got so many different product lines and complementary solutions that they have to invest in. And so by able to find your specialist, you find a whole bunch of organizations that have the same business challenges as yourself. And so the vendor then really specializes in creating solutions and advancements and innovation to help all of their clients at the same time. And it's a nice perpetual circle of improvement once you find the right spot. And the last piece is around the business requirements of the license model. So there's no set way in the industry on how to charge for an LMS. You can do it in a lot of different ways, and it's up to the creativity of any given vendor. Some will say for one price you can have it all. Some will say I got these 10 modules, and how many users need the functionality in each module. And some will say we'll only charge you if somebody comes in and buys a class or takes a class or launches a class. And other organizations will say if they're in the database, we're charging you every year for it. Is that right or wrong? It all depends on your use case, because your use case dictates how your learners are going to use. So if you're focusing on employee learners and you have 1,000 employee learners, well, you need 1,000 employee licenses every year. It makes it real cut and dry. If it's customers and you have 1,000 organizational customers that might have 2 to 100 learners in each one of them, and they may or may not hit the LMS every quarter or every year, well, then you can't pay for 500,000 users when only 100,000 might actually be hitting the system. So you need more of a consumption based on how you're actually physically using the system. So those different types of models exist out there, and so what buyers need to do is define what they really need. And so one way to do that is to look historically on your usage patterns, when your learners, how they access, how many, by month, whatever data you can get on how your learners have been interacting with the system. That's a good line in the sand for today. And then you can make extrapolations from that on where you'll be in a year, 2 years, and 3 years, so that you can really do some nice bookends on what your minimum and maximum user counts would be. And that allows you to go to each vendor with all these other requirements we talked about, but also the size of the breadbox in terms of learners, and get nice apples to apples comparisons back. By the better you can describe your usage pattern, the better vendors can come back and say, okay, here's how we'll help you by licensing it this way. By not talking about this stuff or just taking whatever license model the vendor has, what you end up doing a lot of times, buyers, is there's license mismatch. And whenever there's license mismatch, no matter how good everything else is, from day one, there's a business level mismatch going on, and there's never synergy, and it never works out great, and there's always friction, both personal and political, because of that friction. And so defining that and just using it as one of your criteria allows you to define your requirements and intersperse that with or align that directly with the vendor differentiation. And that allows you to go from that 1,000 to the handful that do exactly what you want. Is it easier said than done? Not with a consultant, not with the resources on the Talented Learning Center, because we teach you how to do it and give you the practical ways to think about this. However, like all things in life, it takes preparation if you really want to do it well. You don't become a brain surgeon on your first day. You don't become a successful owner of a learning system and a learning organization on your first day. It's a process and not an event. And so the way to get successful is to make sure that process is aligned to your business, is aligned to your stakeholder group, into your use cases, your audiences, and how that rolls down to what you really need from a functional, technical, professional services support and a business aspect to support your core business and the measurable success goals or measurable success criteria that you're trying to achieve. If you tie it all the way back to the business and the use cases and build it forward from there, you have the best opportunity to define your requirements like a professional and in a way that you can use to qualify vendors in and out easily, to communicate your project easily to vendors. So if you write all this up, for example, and you give that to a vendor, you can say, read this and then let's talk. The alternative, you can say, let's talk, and I'll try to tell you everything beforehand, but what happens is that the salespeople on the other side, they're prepared, they're not necessarily good listeners, you can't remember to tell everything, you might forget about certain pieces, they may ask good questions, they may ask no questions, and then you see the demonstration that they prepared for you that's really immaterial or not aligned with what your actual situation is. Conversely, you can give these requirements even before a proposal phase and say, this is what we're trying to do and what we want to need. How do you align to this? And most vendors, if they don't align, will run for the doors because they don't want to do all that work for nothing to lose the opportunity. And those that do align and align specifically recognize when something is knocking on their door that's core to their fundamental mission in the marketplace. They try really hard to win that and to demonstrate how they're a match. And so, in all, it's positive to define those requirements so that you can find that match. And when you do find that match, you enjoy the most success that you could possibly have in the industry. So that's how you define your requirements like a pro in 2021. If you take the time to do it, you'll find your right match and the best LMS for you. If you need help, you can contact me or contact us, but use the resources in the Talented Learning Center as a great place to start to educate yourself and help you get to the right LMS for your organization. Thanks, and you can find more of our content at talentedlearning.com and www.talentedlearningcenter.com, our premier vendor or our premier membership community. Thank you, and have a great day.